Welcome back to the Code Wolf. Today we're going to jump right in and look at the new .NET AI project templates that are available in preview. So if you're like me and you create a lot of experimental or sample AI apps, this project template will be a real lifesaver for you. This template takes care of a ton of repetitive tasks we have to do every time we create a new AI app, like adding the right packages, service registrations, building out a simple UI, handling a data store or data ingestion. It takes care of all of that for us, and the templates can be installed with a single command. As a quick side note, if you find this content useful, please hit those subscribe and like buttons to help the channel reach the goal of 10,000 subscribers. I also want to give a special thank you to the latest Delta Wolf member, MH. Thanks so much. Your support means a lot. And thank you to all members, subscribers, and contributors. So to install these templates, we can just run the .NET new install command. And then let's say microsoft.extensions.ai.templates. And it's going to let us know that it'll install that. I already had this installed, but it just says that it will be replaced with the latest version. So there we go. And you'll notice that we now have this new template called AI Chat Web App. And there's also a short name of AI Chat Web. And that's actually the name that we use if we want to create projects through the command line with these templates now. So with these templates, we can either use Visual Studio or we can use the .NET CLI or even VS Code to create apps using this new project template. And so if we wanted to create apps through the command line with this template, we'd of course use the .NET new command, and then we'd say AI chat web there. And there's a variety of parameters here. Actually, this template has a lot of configuration options. So if we do a .h for help to see the different options here, you'll notice that it lets us specify an AI service provider. And right now it supports Azure OpenAI, GitHub Models, Ollama, and OpenAI. And it lets us pick a vector store. So that can either be local or Azure AI Search at the moment. And there's some other options here, such as whether to use managed identity with Azure. And we can even specify the names of our chat and embedding models. So here's a few example commands of what this would look like for different variations. So for the AI service provider, we'd have GitHub Models or Azure OpenAI, and right now these are all using a local vector store. We're not really going to get into Azure search scenarios in this video, but that is out there if you're interested. And then here's the base commands that we use to kind of get started here. So those are the CLI options, but I actually want to show how to do this through Visual Studio because I think this is a nice experience. And so I already created a solution with one of each project, which we'll get to in a second. But first, let's see how we actually got to this point. So if we go up to File, New Project, and after you've installed that package, you can just search for AI, and you'll have this new AI Chat Web option. And so from there, we can hit Next, and then you can just call this whatever you'd like. This screen is just the same as any other Visual Studio project. But on this next screen, we get a few different options, and these are the options I used to create those 4 different projects. So for the AI service provider, from here, we can choose OpenAI, Ollama, and so on that we just discussed. There's 4 different options right now. And the reason there's these 4 is these are the ones that are supported by the Microsoft Extensions AI libraries, if you're familiar with those. If not, don't worry about it right now, but that's why those are the 4. And depending on which one we pick, it actually opens up some different options. So if I pick Azure OpenAI, now we get this keyless authentication checkbox. So if this is checked, it's going to use Azure Identity and your local user account. If you uncheck this, it's just going to use the OpenAI service secrets, which are not a best practice, but that option is there depending on what you want to do. And of course, we have our vector store here, so you can choose between Azure AI Search or local on disk. So I just used those different options to create these 4 projects, one for each of the vendors. And so now let's take a closer look at that generated app, starting in this program.cs file. This is the most important file. Regardless of which AI platform you pick, all of these templates will be roughly the same, so this code tour does apply to all of them. So the first thing that happens is we set up our credentials. In the case of GitHub Models, that's going to be an access token, which we'll look at in a second. So that creates a credential, and then it sets up a chat client and an embedding generator. So the chat client talks to our chat model, which is just GPT-4o mini, but you can change what model you want to talk to here by changing this value. And the embedding generator is text embedding 3 small. So these are just the default models, but you can change these to whatever you'd like as long as they're available in GitHub Models. And again, we'll look at that more in a second. But this embedding generator, this is what helps with some of our data ingestion of the sample data that's in this project. So if you're not that familiar with embeddings, just know that this basically converts some sample PDF documents into embeddings that AI models and vector stores are able to work with more effectively. And so then we set up a JSON vector store. This is just in memory. This holds the embeddings or the vectorized data for the info in those sample PDFs. And those PDFs actually live in this data folder in the www root. So there's a couple sample files that come with this project template. And then this sets up all of our dependency injection for those different services. And there's even a SQLite database to hold that ingested data. And so there's a few different services here that handle ingesting those files and setting up those vector stores and all of that for you. You can see most of those files here under ingestion and in this services folder. I'm not going to get too deep into how all of this code actually works, since most of this is fairly standard code for building AI apps. We're mostly just interested in how the templates are set up and what options are available in this video, but I have plenty of other content on my channel about actually building AI apps. So this is the GitHub Models project that we're looking at now. And so let's see how to actually get this app working. And there's really only one step you have to do. For the most part, this will run out of the box. And that's to configure your GitHub Model Access Token, like I mentioned earlier. And by default, this is set up to pull from configuration, and that can be user secrets. So up here, it gives this sample command of .NET user secrets set, and then you set your GitHub token in a user secret, and it'll pull that in. You could also, of course, configure this to use configuration files in the project, but then your secrets are stored in your code and might get checked into source control, so that's not great. So you'll probably want to stick with user secrets. But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves because first we need a token. So if we go out to GitHub, a lot of people don't realize this, but GitHub models are sort of readily available for you to use. So if you go over to the nav here and you go to Marketplace, you'll find that there's this models option on the left. And so you can just select a model and just start chatting with it essentially or experimenting with it. So if I just say hi, it'll say OpenAI GPT-4 says hello, and so on. So these models are just kind of out there, and as long as you have a GitHub account, you can get limited access to these models. So if we go back to our settings page on our profile, and then down to developer settings, fine-grained tokens under personal access tokens, and then just say create new token. I'm going to call this GitHub models testing. And then you can just leave the rest of this at the default for this demo app and say generate token, and then copy that token. And now over in Visual Studio, that's when you could either run this command in the console, so you'd replace your GitHub token with the one we just copied. Or another way to manage user secrets is actually to right click on the project and say manage user secrets. And this just opens up a JSON file where we can edit those secrets directly. So that was called GitHub Models Token. So we'll say GitHub Models, and then let's just plug in that access token that we created. So I'm just going to add that colon back in here and then hit save. So now that's stored in the user secrets for this project. So now when we go back to our program file, that's the only thing that we have to do here because these two models that the project talks to, those are sort of readily available in GitHub Models. This is kind of the easiest way to get started with AI models. So let's run the app. So we get this nice Blazor UI to work with, and this is a full conversational chat. So it says to get started, try asking about these example documents. You can replace these with your own and replace this message, and so on. So as we discussed earlier, you can add more PDFs to that data folder and those will get ingested as well. So I could say something like, what's in the survival kit? And it's going to think about that for a second and then provide an answer. And you'll notice that it actually gives citations of where it found those. So if I were to click on one of these, it actually takes us to that location in the document. So it's complete with citations. And then it even suggests some other questions down here. So if I were to say, where to buy these survival kits, it's going to give another answer with another citation. And this is actually a pretty nice little UI to interact with this data. So go ahead and play around with this chat UI. Again, this is a Blazor app. So if I stop our app and go over to the components folder, you can see that we have this chat folder. and that's where the different components for that chat UI live. So this is just a standard Blazor app. So go ahead and play around with that or customize it however you want. So that's how you'd get this GitHub Models version working, but I also want to briefly glance at these other AI platforms as well. So starting at the top, we have Azure OpenAI. And so if I were to double click on this, in this case, we just have to provide two values to get started with this template. So we'd have the Azure OpenAI endpoint and the Azure OpenAI key, since we didn't pick the keyless option. Otherwise, this would be using identity. But you can see up here it says to run these commands to manage user secrets for that endpoint in that key. Or again, you can right click and say manage user secrets. So if we go out to Azure, if you have an OpenAI service deployed, you would just go to your keys and endpoints and copy the key and the endpoint, and then add those to your user secrets either through the CLI or through that JSON file. So you will have to go and deploy an Azure OpenAI service, and I have videos on my channel of how to do that. But once that's deployed, those keys will be here. And Azure OpenAI is a bit more of a manual process because this template defaults to the GPT-4o Mini and text embedding 3 small models again, but these will not be deployed by default in your OpenAI service. You would actually have to go into your settings here into Azure AI Foundry and deploy those models manually. So unlike GitHub models, those aren't just readily available. So that's why I chose the GitHub models. I think it's really nice for getting started. Now there are a couple others in here. So we have Ollama, and if I open that up, Ollama is interesting because there really is no secret key or anything like that. You just need your local host URL. So on this computer, I already have Ollama running. Ollama can just run all kinds of models locally. So if you go out to ollama.com, you can download this and install it. And then you just pull down models individually, sort of like Docker containers, and run them. And so here it's using Llama 3.2 and all mini LM for the embedding generator. So if we were to say Ollama pull Llama 3.2, it's going to go ahead and pull the manifest for that. And then that'll be available in Ollama to run with this template. So in this case, you just need to install Ollama and pull down those two models. And the URL endpoint is the default here, so you shouldn't have to change that. That's just the port that Ollama runs on. And finally, last but not least, we have OpenAI. This is kind of similar to GitHub models. So in this case, you're just going to need your OpenAI key, and then these two models will already be available. So if we go out to OpenAI, you're just going to need an OpenAI account, and then you would go into your project API keys here and create a new key. And then after you create that, you're going to go back and again add that to your user secrets, so that gets pulled into the project. So thanks so much for watching. Please hit those subscribe and like buttons, and I'll see you next time.